Well, hello there, intelligent non-specialists interested in the historical Jesus. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this book, Zealot by Resa Aslan. You might remember Resa Aslan from a YouTube clip that's been floating around the internet where he was defending himself from a Fox News reporter because he's a Muslim writing about Jesus. So first of all, what is Aslan wanting to say about Jesus? What he's wanting to say about Jesus is that Jesus is a zealot, the title of his book. He's a zealot. So what was a zealot? A zealot was a political revolutionary in Jesus' time, in the early 1st century. Zealots would fight against the Roman Empire, which were an occupying force, occupying the Jewish nation. They felt that God was on their side, and that if they would only fight, they would be able to uproot the Romans and have their land back. He has a lot of evidence for this. The fact that Jesus called himself a Messiah. There were plenty of other zealot leaders that called themselves Messiah. Messiah meaning an anointed one, that meaning that they were the one chosen by God to lead the Jews to fight against the Romans and win, and therefore be the king. So some of the evidence is that Jesus is always talking about the kingdom of God. This was a rallying cry for the zealots. Most of these would-be messiahs would talk about the kingdom of God, and that word kingdom meaning the same word in the Roman Empire. So it's not the kingdom of Rome, it's the kingdom of God, specifically the Jewish God. He speaks about Jesus cleansing the temple, that this was a political statement in opposition to Rome. The temple of Jesus' time was very much tied up with Rome. Rome allowed them to make these sacrifices, and the people, the Jews in charge of the temple, were very corrupt. They were in it to make money, and most of the Jewish people, particularly the Zealots, saw them as in it with the Romans. And so Jesus cleansing the temple was this show of him saying, look, you're not using this temple in the way that God has meant it to be used. Also, when Jesus says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, in this story where his adversaries say, well, hey, should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? Jesus says, well, pull out a coin, tell me whose picture is on it. And they look at it and they say, that's Caesar's picture. And Jesus says, well, then, give back to Caesar what's Caesar's, and give back to God what is God's. The Jews believed that the land that the Romans were occupying was God's land. That's very explicit in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. That says that the land is the Lord's, and that we as Jews are only occupying it and tending it. And then there's the simple evidence of Jesus' crucifixion. Crucifixion was a Roman punishment to show what happens to political revolutionaries. The bandits on either side of Jesus in his crucifixion, that word bandit is often translated, Aslan points out, it's usually the word that means a political revolutionary, someone who fights against the empire. It doesn't mean a thief exactly, it's more like a terrorist or a freedom fighter, depending on which side you're on. So that's what would happen to a failed Messiah, a failed zealot, is crucifixion. So that alone almost is enough evidence to point towards Jesus being a zealot. Another interesting thing I wanted to quote from the book, this is in page 78 of his book. When Jesus is about to be arrested, he says, have you come out here with swords and clubs to arrest me like a bandit? And that bandit being the word referring to a political revolutionary. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. So the question is, do I agree with Aslan's interpretation? Is he correct in saying that Jesus was a zealot? My answer is basically yes, but. Because of all the reasons I've just cited, there are a lot of reasons that point to Jesus being a zealot, but We could write a book called Pharisee that points towards Jesus being a Pharisee. Pharisees taught, they tried to live out the scriptures as well as they could in a contemporary context. These scriptures, from their point of view, being written thousands of years before, how do they live it out in a contemporary way? That's what Pharisees did. That's what Jesus did. And they also opposed Rome, just like Jesus did, just like the Zealots did. You could write a book called Essene, where you say Jesus was an Essene. Jesus wasn't married, which is the Essenes being Jews that would go out into the desert and live sort of in a proto-monastic life, where they weren't married and they would live a very ascetic life. Jesus wasn't married. He spent long times in the wilderness, alone. He had a very significant relationship with John the Baptist, who has some very Essene-like qualities. He lived out in the desert. So you could write that book. You could write Essene, about Jesus the Essene. The whole truth, I think, is that Jesus didn't completely fit into any of these categories. Jesus was kind of a zealot, but he was kind of not a zealot. Zealots were very violent, and Jesus, it's pretty clear in the Gospels that Jesus is non-violent. Aslan argues against that, but I don't think that his evidence for that is very compelling. So you can see that Jesus had a lot of elements that were different from different groups in his time, and he doesn't completely fit in one of those, and he's not completely separate from any of these either. Going back to what I quoted from page 78 of Aslan's book, where Jesus says, "Have you come out here with swords and clubs to arrest me like a bandit?" It seems pretty clear that he's saying, look at the irony of this situation. I'm a non-violent guy. I haven't tried to hurt anyone, and yet you're coming out here like I'm a political revolutionary. Why does he ask this question if he is so obviously a zealot? If he was a zealot, he'd say, well, bring it on. You know that I'm a zealot. Instead, he's saying, you're treating me like a political revolutionary. Is that really what you think I am? I think Jesus was more complicated than that. But there's a lot that we can get from this book that is important. I had a conversation with a coworker who saw me reading this book and asked me what it was about, and I explained a little bit about what I've been saying, that this writer believes that Jesus was a zealot, and she knew a little bit and knew what a zealot was, and asked me more questions. A lot of them in the vein of, weren't the zealots the bad guys? Didn't the zealots do this and that and this? So I think it's interesting when we see these elements of Jesus being a zealot that it makes us a little more sympathetic to the cause of the zealots and to their modern day contemporaries. When we talk about terrorism, that was, if you look at our situation today, the zealots were very much the terrorists, or from their point of view, the freedom fighters, and we're very much like the Roman Empire. So when we look at Jesus' story, especially as American Christians, what do we see when we see the figure of our religion identifying more with these zealots, with these terrorists, with these freedom fighters, than with us, the Roman Empire? So for all those reasons, I think that his book is very important, points out some important things, but at the same time, I don't agree with every single bit of it, but I think it's an important read for anyone who's interested in the historical